Another lie that Noem told us was that these officers were following protocol and their training. Well, let me read to you the use of force guidelines of the Department of Justice. 1, firearms shall not be discharged solely to disable moving vehicles. Deadly force is permitted only when an officer reasonably believes that a person in the vehicle poses an imminent threat of death or serious injury to the officer or others. If the vehicle is operated in a manner that threatens death or serious injury, officers are generally expected to move out of the vehicle's path, if possible, rather than firing at it. And we saw, even though he took the time to shoot, he was able to move out of the vehicle's path. He would have been able to do that even more quickly, more efficiently, totally avoiding even the slightest contact. And we don't know if there was any contact, and he certainly wasn't injured if he hadn't stopped to fire. But here's an even grosser violation. Did he stop after he fired that first shot and get out of the path of the vehicle?
He shot 2 more shots.
Right. And when you freeze frame the second and third shots, you see him standing there at the side of the vehicle in no danger of being hit because he's at the side and the vehicle's going the other way. He stands there in a shooter stance, points his gun at the open window like this, and fires 2 shots point blank into her face. There can be no self-defense justification for those 2 shots.
So,
let me one quick point. Arguably, it was those shots that killed her because they were point blank through the open window, whereas the first shot had to go through the windshield, which could have deflected it.
Now, I heard JD Vance earlier today saying, well, it only matters if he thought he was in danger. And if he thought he was in danger, then he's justified in the self-defense of shooting. What's your response to that?
That's nonsense. I mean, yes, one's perception is relevant here, but it's got to be tied to the objective facts of the situation.
Right.
He just can't say, oh, I was in danger, even though I was on the side of the vehicle, nowhere, not close to the vehicle, a couple, 3 feet away. The vehicle was moving in the other direction. I went into a shooter stance, stuck my gun, close to the open window and fired at her twice. I don't care what he says. There is no way that could be considered self-defense.
So in a court of law, will they look at the second and third shot and say, hey, if you just shot that first shot, we might say, okay, you thought you were in danger, you took a shot. But because you took that second and third shot when you were clearly out of danger,
you were firing point blank at her face.
Hold on, let me finish.
Oh, sorry.
Then his case collapse of self-defense? Or how does that work exactly?
Absolutely. I don't even think the first shot was in self-defense because he was getting out of the way and was never really in danger.
I don't personally either, but in a court of law, he will certainly try to argue that, like, again, this is sort of a moot point because he did fire 3 shots, but in that first shot, he would probably argue in a court of law, well, I thought I was in danger, even if the wheel was moving, et cetera, et cetera. In that split-second law enforcement decision, I thought I was in danger. But you're saying the second and third shot nullify that defense completely.
Correct.
Right.
Whatever you might be able to argue about the first shot, and you and I both agree, even the first shot was not arguably in self-defense because he was easily getting out of the way. But you could not, no reasonable person could believe, standing there on the side of the vehicle in a shooter stance, firing point blank through an open window in her face, could possibly be an act of self-defense.
Right. Now,
let me further it. If it was just the subjective belief, then no one would ever be convicted of murder, right? Because anyone could say, oh, yeah, I felt I was, in danger. It's got to be weighed against the objective circumstances.
No, of course, I agree.
One other point.
Oh, go ahead.
He never should have been in front of that vehicle in the first place. That is a clear another clear violation of Department of Justice guidelines. Under officer positioning, the officer may approach either side of the stopped vehicle for safety reasons. Either side. You cannot approach the front of the vehicle. And Sam, aside from Department of Justice guidelines, that makes sense. Does it make it any sense to go in front of a moving vehicle? Who would do that?
I don't know.
I mean, I take Uber all the time. Uber stops, lets me out. They're at a dead stop. I never walk in front of the vehicle, ever. It just makes no sense, ever, to walk in front of a vehicle when you absolutely don't have to.
A couple quick updates from Portland. Portland Police Chief says they don't know the facts of the shooting. Portland Police Chief Bob Day said they, quote, do not know the facts of this case related to today's shooting, but are offering support to federal agents who are conducting an investigation. The mayor of Portland, I believe, just spoke. He's calling on Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, to halt all operations in Portland until today's shooting involving federal agents is fully investigated. The mayor said, quote, we know what the federal government says happened here, Wilson said during a press conference. There was a time when we could take them at their word. That time is long past. That's what we were saying earlier, too.
Absolutely. I want to make a couple more points about Minneapolis, Sam, and then we can move on. Again, I stress, there was not the faintest indication that that guy, the shooter, I think they named him, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
Some of them Ross, I think was his name.
Something like that.
Not the slightest indication he suffered even the most minor of injuries. You know, he was walking perfectly normally. 2, he fled the scene.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Yes. If you did nothing wrong, you shouldn't be fleeing the scene. Plus, it was a homicide, right? There are only 4 causes of death: suicide, accident, natural causes, and homicide. None of the first 3 apply. It was a homicide. The only argument would be is that's a justifiable homicide. When you commit a homicide, you cannot flee the scene.
I know, that was so crazy. People are saying the name of the ICE agent was Jonathan Ross.
Jonathan Ross. The other point, remember I said that under DOJ guidelines, federal law enforcement officers have an affirmative duty to render aid or to have someone else render aid. Well, in the video, again, this is not an interpretation. A physician says, I am a physician. Let me check her. And you know what the ICE agent says?
No.
I don't care. We have medics arriving. It was at least 15 minutes before the medics arrived. Now, maybe it made no difference. Maybe her wounds were so grievous that even if the doctor had intervened, it wouldn't have helped. But this was a clear violation of Justice Department guidelines, plus a clear violation of basic humanity. Why wouldn't you have a doctor on the scene rendering aid in advance of who knows when the medics would arrive? So, you know, there's so much else in context here that one has to consider.
You know, obviously we're just into the new year, 8 days, but there's been one homicide in the new year in Minneapolis. Guess what it was?
This one?
This one, the shooting, the ICE shooting. There's been one homicide in Minneapolis since January 1st, and it was an ICE shooting. The other thing I'm wondering is, where are all the don't tread on me guys? Where are all the guys that say, you know, we need the Second Amendment in case the federal government gets out of control and infringes on our rights and tries to stomp us out? Where are the people who are freaking out over the federal government mandating masks? You know, small government, small federal government. Where are these people? They're defending all this. Doesn't make any sense to me. And, you know, I'm sure if it was happening in their cities, they'd be up in arms. But because it's happening in these blue cities, they don't seem to give a shit. And their principles of don't tread on me and small federal government seems to fly out the window.
Read my book, right? My book absolutely validates what Sam says. that these so-called principles like limited government, support for, against government intrusion are principles or ideas, they're not even principles, put out for public consumption that have absolutely no relationship to what the right wing in America now stands for or really has stood for
but it's not
in
even
the last 100 years.
But it's not even history. Like I'm saying, we have a recent example, the pandemic, where you have right-leaning people in America freaking out about things like the mask mandates, right? The strong arm of the government.
Yes.
But they're not freaking out that the federal government is sending thousands of federal agents to U.S. cities, armed, not in correlation with the state and local officials. Masked. Unidentified, unmiked cars. For some reason, they don't seem to have any problem with this, and I can't wrap my mind around that. Again, I understand the historical context, but I'm saying recently we have a very prime example of the American right freaking the hell out about the strong arm of the federal government, and they don't seem to give a shit about this. And
because it's all transactional, has nothing to do with adherence to principle, as I point out in my book. You're, right on the money with all of this. The Second Amendment people, the limited government people, the libertarian people should be absolutely outraged and appalled by what's going on with ICE crashing in our communities. And by the way, this is the tip of the iceberg. They in the big ugly bill, they appropriated over $100 billion for an expansion of ICE. So what you're seeing now may be doubled and tripled over the next year. Think about how horrific that would be.
Absolutely. And it's like, you feel for this woman, Renee, because, who knows what you would do in that moment. Maybe the best thing for her to do was to stop and put her hands up. But no American citizen wants to be detained by these thugs in ICE. I mean, you're going to end up in some random immigration detention center. Are you even going to get due process? Are you going to get fed properly? I mean, nobody wants these guys in our streets because nobody wants to be detained by them and sent to some crazy Trump-led immigration detention center.
I read, but some sources believe that as many as 25 people have died in these horrific detention centers, these, unhygienic, terrible, dilapidated, awful conditions that people are confined in. Thanks for watching our video, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and become a member today.